has a significant bearing on a country's competitiveness and economic growth. Excessive bureaucracy, we all know what that means, and regulation, a lack of transparency and inadequate legal frameworks all cause additional costs on business and impede expansion. This is like what we're going to be talking about today. How many of us do economics? My husband warned me that some of you don't know what GDP means and GDP per capita. Do we know what these things mean? And if you have any questions, just kindly raise your hand and ask what does that mean, so that we follow and understand each other. So what they're saying here is that if a government is working well, the country will develop. And will continue growing. But if a country is not working well, if it's not efficient enough, nothing will go on. And in order to examine local governments, we have to start with our government, because the government is like a parent and the local governments are like the children, you know. So if you go to a home and you ask a kid, oh, how is life? They'll tell you what the parent is doing in the home, you know. So in order to understand our local governments, we have to understand the overview, which is our government and our country. Collect data and analyze and report on the government efficiency. And Uganda is doing very badly because, of course, we are among the least developed countries. But the best countries like Singapore and then like the G20s are doing very well. And of course, we have to learn from them, though we have very different backgrounds and very different infrastructure, the macroeconomic environment, and health and primary education are like the basics. In order to, Uganda was colonized. It's a British colony. It's a former British colony. And all the countries that were colonized, the colonialists put up institutions which are called extractive institutions. Have we heard of that? Yes. These are institutions which practically extracting is taking advantage of, like you work and give them without having and a payback, the payback that you deserve. So those are the institutions that were set up, and that's why we still struggle so much with corruption. Further, extraction, which means you will work very hard and earn very little. And you know what that means? It means you'll have to be corrupt to earn, like to make life. You have to imagine you're a government worker and you're earning 300,000 because of this extractive institution. That's just one example. The low salaries and everything. And you have children and you must take them to school, and your children probably get sick, and your children want to eat every day. How will you feed them if you're a government worker? A vicious cycle of problems, and one problem leads to another, and you want to curb corruption, but you cannot curb corruption because people are poor and they need the money. So even when they need the money and they are able to get it through corruption, they thank God. They say, oh, thank you God for providing for us. You know? So you're spoiling your own countries, not that you're spoiling the system, but you're depriving your countrymen of a better life just to make your life better. You see, it's like an irony. It's not an irony. It's just a vicious cycle of problems. So our first section is not even covered. We do not even have the basic requirements because our institutions are still very poor. That's why we have a very weak system. Our infrastructure is still very poor. Our macroeconomic environment may be a bit better, but it's also very poor. We don't even want to buy our Ugandan products. You know, they say buy Uganda, build Uganda, but when you see it, we're like, made in Uganda, it's local. Made in UK, oh, we buy that, you know. We're also slaves, you know, and we sabotage our own development like that. Because when you buy a Ugandan product, you're building your own country. Health and primary education, we all know what that's like. You go up country and children are running around instead of going to school. And even when they go to school, there are no teachers. And that's the majority of the population. So, like we were saying before, I told us about Uganda being a former British colony, which explains our government structure like most former British colonies. Uganda is part of sub-Saharan Africa, meaning we deal with these same extractive institutions, we are dealing with poverty, we are dealing with war, we are resource rich, which sometimes that does occur because even now people do not know. Do you know, as citizens, do you know what's happening to your oil? If I may ask, who knows what's happening to our oil? Can anyone say they know what's happening to our oil? No, because those records are kind of kept away from the public, which is not good. You as a citizen should know what's happening to your oil. You as a citizen should know what's happening to the resource in your country. The people have the right to know. But is that country transparent? Not enough. Not to that level yet. So we are resource rich, but we are suffering and we are still ridden, very highly ridden with corruption. The health is fair. Our health is not as bad as, but it's still poor. Because our health centers are not doing well thanks to the poor local government. So we are just at 0.5, which is halfway. It's a scale between 0 and 1. So at 0.5 it means we're just halfway. The quality of our people, which is quality of life, is just halfway. That's human, not infrastructure and everything else. We are still aid dependent, and we are still aid dependent, meaning we still depend on international donors to give us money, which we steal. And then we're trying to go through the aggressive development drive thanks to NDP2. That's the national development plan, which is in the second phase. The second phase is ending. We're supposed to be starting the third phase in 2020. So the NDP2, its goal is to get Uganda's GDP per capita to 1,039, which is the minimum. For middle class income country. So this 1,039, but we are still at 849. So I don't know if we shall be able to hit that by in only 1 year. It may take 2 or 3 more years to hit that, or if we are lucky. This year we'll see. Next year we'll see the reports of 2019. So we've been growing slowly, very slowly. The rest of GDP, because it's like divided. So you get the money up, divide by the people. So if you have a very high population and a very high population growth rate, the GDP kind of remains low. That's why some countries, because they feel like we have to earn a very good GDP per capita, they encourage people not to give back, They tell people maybe 1 or 2 children, and then people start getting fewer children, so that they curb the population growth rate, so that the GDP per capita grows, you see? Does that make sense? Do you understand? Because that's like the, how do they call that factor which is below the divide thing? Let's remember that primary one. Yes. But the GDP is the amount of money that the country has. So GDP per capita is almost like the average that every person should have. 2019, on average, every Ugandan had this amount of money, $849 in the whole year, which is very little money if you think about it. Not so? So local governments in Uganda are created to promote decentralization, so that they spread that development out of the city, and then they improve local service delivery efficiency, and then promote local economic development and implement infrastructure development. Because the main government can't be there to watch which small feeder road needs repair. So the local governments must do that. And then we have the judiciary. Judiciary makes sure that there's a high court in every district. The ministries, they have a representation for these 7 in every local government. And then the parliament, the parliament has an MP representing every single county in that country. That's all. But below the county, because it's a five-level hierarchy, we have the district at the top. So let's say Mukono district. And the Mukono district shall have a county, and these are the MPs who represent us in parliament for every county. And there are maybe about 3 counties per district. Then we have a sub-county under every sub-counties under every county, maybe 3 sub-counties per county, and then we have the parish under every sub-county, usually about 10. Now they spread out, and then a sub-parish or a village. And we know all those things because we choose them when we are. I think some of us are not sure about the exact If they ask you where your home is and they say, which is your county, which is your parish, some of us are not even sure. But when you're doing your national ID, I think you filled in those forms. So there's also the village. And there are about 2 villages per parish. So now the political leadership is like this. You have the LC1 at the bottom, LC2, LC3, then the LC4 who is like the MP, and then the LC5 at the district. And then you have the mayor. So it's like we have in the political leadership, you'll have now like a district, you'll have a mayor in charge of the municipality, you'll have an LC5, and we're going to see how all these many leaderships sometimes cause chaos at the top, because every leader wants their political propaganda to go through, every leader maybe wants this or that, and then sometimes they fight. Because you have the cow, you have the chief administrative officer in charge of all these ministries. Then you have the LC5 in charge of the district. Then you have a mayor in charge of the town. So you see how all these top heads can start fighting. We all know what used to happen to Jennifer Musisi from the news. Remember?
Yes.
Yes. Then the Urban Authorities Association, its oversees operations of the municipal council. We shall see what that means. And then the Local Government Association, it unites the local governments to improve their standards. So every district has a main local government, with some local government. And of which there are lower local governments. So there's like an upper local government and then the lower one. So the main ones, I also in 2 categories. There's the rural one, the rural area, which is like the district council, and then with sub-county councils under it, or city, the city with city council like KCCA, and then with its subdivisions like Rubaga division. So we have like the main local governments would either be, if it's a rural area, it would be a district council. Let's say if it's sub-county, or if it's in the city, it would be like a city council. And then if it's a lower local government, we have the municipality, so we shall see many municipality councils, but those are lower. They are municipal councils and then municipal division councils, and then the town councils. These are the ones for every little town. Everything is running well. So that's how the thing looks like, the political financing. How does money come up from the consolidated fund down to the local government? We went through a process which starts with planning. So every local government has its planning unit. They'll sit and say, this is what we need for 2020, 2021. You know how a financial year starts from July to the end of June 30th. So they will plan for the next financial, and the planning starts as early as September of every year. So there's planning, and then there's budgeting, and there's approval of these budgets. Then when these budgets are approved, they are financed, and then of course they have to be monitored and evaluated for the course of the implementation, and then reports have to be made, and those reports make the basis for the next planning. So it's a cycle, each dependent on the other. So for plans to start, for the planning council or the planning body or the planning meeting, the planning committee has to take into account so many plans that are broader than itself, and then implement these plans according to those plans. So Uganda, for example, it has the overarching strategy for Uganda's development, which is the NDP plan, the National Development Plan I talked about, which is supposed to we have the Africa Agenda 2063 for the African Union, which also must be adhered to. The East African Community Protocols. We have the Vision 2040, that's in Uganda. It's kind of political, but it's also very good. The National Government Plan, which we've been talking about. Sanja Hakuna Mchezo goes down, because that is supposed to make sure that the government programs are implemented. It's like a prefect. Then we have the Public Sector Management Strategic Plan, and then the Local Government Financing Commission itself has a strategic plan for every 3 years. So the plan that every district makes should be in line with all these. They are not contradictory really, because before you make the Africa Agenda Plan, it must be in line with sustainable development goals. Each plan has to be in line with the plans bigger than it, so it's not very hard. The Africa Agenda 2063 is a 50-year plan to transform Africa into a global powerhouse. Then we know Vision 2040, which is a bit political, but it's okay. It's supposed to increase Uganda's GDP per capita to 9,500 by 2040. So we have 20 years to go to grow by over $8,000 in the GDP per capita to achieve Vision 2040. We have the national government plan, which we've seen, the public sector management strategic plan makes sure that all the public workers and all the public offices are adhering to its plan, which is to provide good services to the people. And then we have the program-based budgeting, which must be adhered to the strategic plan of the local government financing, and then below that we get the local government plans themselves. So the budgeting tools that the committees use are a district or urban local government plan. Like that's the district saying, we need this, we need this, we need this. Then there's a local government is designed as well by the Local Government Financing Commission together with Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. And then we have the previous budget and government. So before a plan is made, you have to see the previous plans. If they were still building a hospital, we'll continue with that. If they were still building a school, we'll continue. So there has to be a form of continuity in these plans. And so the aspects of every single budget will have the recurrent budget, like payment of workers that never ends year after year after year. Like those are running expenses. And then the capital development budget, or those are expenses which are one time, like build a school, build a road, build this which will not be there the next year, or which may not have been there the previous year. So there's the continuous one and then the one-time things. So this is the project, the process which I was telling you that starts in September. In September, people start meeting from the tour, and then they continue meeting up. Every district has a prison and those people must eat. So there have to be minimums that every district should have, and then there have to be maximums. So those plans that the government has, the local government planning committee have made, have to fund into those programs as well. And by May, the plans are waiting for approval. Then by June, they're either approved or final revisions are made, and then either some things are removed and so some things are added and then they are approved. So at least by the end of June 30th, the budget should be approved for the next financial year. And that's when they do the reading of the whole country's budget. So, Ministry of Finance has, I told you, for example, they have a framework that must be followed. They also use allocation formulae to make sure that every section of our local government has adequate resources to go through and cover water and environmental needs, agriculture needs, health needs, gender, labor and social development, education, and sports, works and transport and local government. That's under other ministries that had shown us saying that every local government should have an aspect in each of its ministries. So there's a grant allocation formula that the Ministry of Finance uses. So sometimes like an activity may have more money than it needs, and there'll be a flexibility cap that can be shifted, like that can be reallocated or shifted to an activity that needs it more. So let's say this was the minimum for 2 sections. So there will always be that allowance. Let's say from the hospitals, maybe they didn't need that much money because they already had maybe the local health centers built. So they can always give some money to the schools who need the money. You see, so even the activities can share some resources, but there is always a limit with which these things can be done. The local governments get their money from three main, there are three main and then an additional one, three main sources. The government grants, which is the consolidated fund. The government is in charge of financing, it's actually the main financer of these local government activities, which cover mainly the wage and non-wage recurrent expenses. So those as a minimum must be covered because people must continue working. And then you have the local revenues from taxes and fees. So a busy place like Kampala may make so much more money than, let's say, a town with very few people, because Kampala has way more people and activities to levy taxes from than, let's say, a quiet town. And then there's also grants and loans from government organization. World Bank may decide to start a school somewhere or set up a hospital somewhere. So even these government organizations can give the local government some money. And then occasionally transfers from other government sections, like I had shown us in the previous slides. And then the government grant allocation is subdivided into three categories. Then this is the money from the consolidated fund. There's the unconditional grant, which is a minimum payment that local governments need to provide the decentralized services. Then the conditional grant, these are activities which the local government must carry out with line ministry. So they'll say, if you don't do that, we won't give you the money. Then there's equalization grants. These are grants which are there to help the very weak local governments which don't even have enough people to maybe levy enough taxes from. They substitute with some equalization grant just so at least everyone has some money. It's hardly in line with their plan. So we plan and we plan so well, we make the budgets and make them so well. But what happens when it's time for implementation? That's why things start falling apart. So the local government implementation, which I had shown us, resources are coordinated and services are delivered at every time. Each time has different responsibilities, with the districts at the top, these are the head leaders, down to counties and municipal councils, then sub-counties and town councils, then parishes, and then villages. How many of us have seen a very rich village? Mengo is a rich village. Isn't Mengo a division? Yes. So, many times, by the time the money and the resources trickle down, so districts get all the money from the consolidated fund, and then they have to make sure that each of these, the counties have enough money. Then the county will make sure that it allocates enough money to the town council. So by the time services reach here, it means these people have done a big job. And if the money was not enough, these people won't have water, they won't have good roads, and they won't be living well with health centers without medicine. You see? So you go to a town and the town may have one good or two good tarmac roads, but by the time you reach the parish, it's just a good tarmac, a good maram road. By the time you reach the village, it's not even a good maram road, it's just a maram road which is at the mercy of the cars which keep passing to make their way. So if the local governments are to do a good job, they need enough money and good leadership for the money not to be stolen at this level. Usually, the people in charge of the money are the ones who have the access to steal it. So if these people are not stealing money, and if they are doing that job right, most probably, these people would have enough resources to implement their activities, and so forth, so on, so on and so forth. They don't have enough civic knowledge, they don't know what their rights as citizens are. So they don't know, they cannot even ask for accountability from the district and say, you're my leader, what did you do for me? And the person will say, oh, elect me to be your LC1, LC2, I'll make sure we have a Maram Road. In the 5 years, you found a Maram Road and you're just living a better Maram Road. You see, even us as the people, we do not hold our leaders accountable enough. If we did, if the power was with us, the people, okay, I don't become political now. But if we knew our rights and we knew what our responsibility is as citizens, we hold our leaders accountable. And maybe try to make sure that they give us the resources that they provide for us. They provide us with the services that are supposed to provide us with. So poor communication and ignorance, the ignorance is mainly of the masses. And the poor communication could also be with the people who are working within the local governments. Most of them will be fighting that. I told you, having many leaders at the top. Then you have corruption, which is the main problem. It incapacitates anything else. If there's no money, nothing else will work. So corruption, usually there's payroll anomalies and then siphoning of funds, which is the most common. Corruption paralyzes everything, in short. We have bureaucracy. This is not too much, because if you have the leaders and you have the money, then you should be able to implement. But sometimes that LC1 chairperson may not be able to do something because the LC3 chairperson hasn't done his job. You know, when you have many levels and many leaders in different levels, then the one at the bottom has to ask the one at the top for permission. The LC2 will go to LC3, LC3 go to county, the MP, LC5. Are these leaders working well together? So if they're not working well together, things will not be done well. Political interference and interpersonal conflicts between these leaders, like I was telling you, one district has the LC5 person, it has the mayor, it has the cow. So who has the power to do what? And then you'll see the mayor, because of this political propaganda, trying to push for things which may not be in line with even the budgets that were approved by the Ministry of Finance, but just to get his propaganda forward. So we have a lot of political interference, and this causes many problems. Then we have many backhand critical posts, because maybe a district will want a planner, but then the planner is highly educated and they cannot accept maybe 700 shillings per month. So the place will go unfilled. Or it will be filled by someone without the qualifications. I know what that means. So if someone without the qualifications fills a post because they need the money, will services be delivered? Will there be any efficiency? So if you want the right people in the right places, you want a proper planner, that has to be maybe a researcher. If you want an engineer, that should be someone with a PhD who is going to be in charge of other engineers. Or someone at least with a master's and many years of experience. So if you want quality services, you have to get quality people. And the quality people do not want to take 700,000 per month. So it's like one problem leads to another and to another sufficiency. So very many vacant critical posts, insufficient funds to carry on inspections. That's now by the Ministry of Local Government and the two people who should be following up with the people on the ground, see if they're working well. We don't have the money to go and see. Then weak financial management and accountability. Very many local governments as recent as 2015 didn't even have their work in data sets on Excel sheets. So if you've been working and the district has been collecting taxes and things are not even entered in the computer, just a computer, how will you be accountable for the funds properly? How will you add them up right by the time the year ends? So these gaps make corruption very easy. Low wages which do not attract the required technocrats. Ever increasing number of local government. Every 6 months we have a new district. Every 6 months a new district. I don't know, if you're a parent and you have 2 children who are fighting, is the solution getting 6 more children? I don't know, it could be subject to debate. Okay, let's say you have 10 children and you feel like you don't trust them to take care of you in your old age. You get 20 more children, hoping that at least one of them will take care of you. Maybe the government has good reasons to add districts, but it's continuous adding of districts that is supposed to promote decentralization proves to be a burden when it comes to financing. Because again, you have to set up a whole little government in a small section. So there's pros and cons to that ever-increasing number of districts. And the collection of revenues. Because people may not pay taxes. Instead of paying taxes, they pay a bribe to avoid the tax. Or they pay a bribe to avoid the fine which they were supposed to pay. Unspent balances. Many financials close with a lot of money still, on the account. And what does that mean? That the activity for which that money was allocated was not carried out. Every financial year closes with unspent balances, which is not good. And yet there are some sections which will be saying we didn't have enough money, and yet there's money for something else and it wasn't money. And the facilitation to do the proper work, that's for now the people within the local government. They don't have enough tools. I just mentioned computers. They don't have enough tools to do their job. So I'm going to say an example of Ginger local government non-tax revenue. They're expected to get 1 billion, and then they get 999 million. Then the transfers from the Uganda Consolidated Fund, this was the money approved. This was the exact money given, there was no variance. This was good. Sometimes a budget is approved by the government does not give the district all the money. It gives it less. Sometimes it will even give it more if they have an agenda. And then transfers from other governments. Let's say they expected 2.2 billion, they got only 1.9 billion from other governments, but that was a very big gap. So what they expected from other government units to help them with didn't come through. This is a very big gap, 284 million shillings. These are so many activities that could have been done with that money. Then grants received, they expected 198 million, they got 197, that is fine, only 700,000. So in total, the district received 43 billion shillings to go through its activities for the year. That's for 2018 to 2019. So that was the money on the account, but how much did they use? They used 41 billion, meaning 2.4 billion was left unused. That's an unspent balance. Then you ask why? You know, because once there's a balance, that balance must be returned to the consolidated fund. It means things didn't go as planned. Some things happened. But then they had their projects. So I don't know if you can read well, because I won't read each and every project. But this was their planned output, you see. So they're supposed to say construction of Wenge Seed Secondary School. That's one school. And so many things that they were supposed to do, like water, with education, with health, and road maintenance. This was their planned output, but then this was their actual output. So where there is 2 and 1, it means that they missed 1 classroom block. Where there is 5 and then we see 3, it means that 3 latrines were not built. Then when you see 120 and 120, they did a very good job. 10, 12. So the gaps are not so big in some areas. It seems they did a good job. Do you see? They did a good job. It's why their balance was not as much. So this was the budgeted amount, and then the actual amount that was given, and then this report is from the Office of the Auditor General. So this is the auditor's conclusion and assessment. So many things are fully implemented. So you could say they did a good job. But many times, the report will say they did a good job, and then you go on ground, and the good job was shoddy. Instead of a proper tarmac road, there's a tarmac road missing like 3/4 of the proper ingredients. You see? So they'll say done. And when they say done, with the funds out, it means those funds went to private pockets. That's what happened. So you would see that a district may say it's performing well, but when you go on ground, what's the quality of that pit latrine? What's the quality of that classroom block? It was put in. Corruption is like something that's deep within all of us. It's like when you watch a movie and then there's the guy who is robbing the bank. We're all on the side of the robber. Cheering the robber on. All our parents, in one way or another, have had to raise us, and some of them, if they were not businessmen, even if they were businessmen, maybe they had to bribe some taxpayers, some tax people who were levying the taxes, tax collectors. Our parents, some of them are working in the government, and then you ask yourself, How your parent who is earning 500,000 is able to pay for the 6 of you through high school and through university. Some of us have brothers and sisters, and we all know people who are working in the government or in some position and they're making a lot of money. And then sometimes you see them land on opportunities and make a lot of money. And we'll cheer them all because they need the money and we also need the money. We're all beneficiaries in the corruption. So it's very hard, therefore, as benefactors to again say we are fighting the corruption. You have to solve that need first before people can be free to work with integrity. I'd love to hear your thoughts on corruption.
My comment is in line with the last statement you just made. Iron out some of these issues before people can be free to work with it. So what then should we do?
My name is Kevin. I do civil engineering and I'm a student. Thank you so much for the presentation. I came here just a few minutes ago and I've learned it. Now, my thoughts about corruption, according to what I know, corruption is almost impossible to remove. There's almost no one is perfect. All you can do is you can reduce the amount of corruption. Like you can reduce how much people steal. I love the word steal because that's the truth. Stealing. But now, according to what I've known over the years, people have involved that kind of corruption. There used to be this kind of corruption where the government releases money, then the local leaders use all of it. But now, since so many people, I would say also Africa Policy Center in some way is influencing people's thoughts about corruption and how to advocate against it. People's minds are open and they are like, instead of eating all the money, I think I should use this money wisely. So I've known about something called smart corruption. Smart corruption is where you get money, do very good work, then the balance, you eat it. It's all yours. And it happens everywhere. Like the district where I come from Kapchora district. Now in Kapchora district, sometimes money has come. The president has released money and the money is going to be used to construct a church. So there's a cathedral being constructed in Kapchora. Everyone knew that the money reached, but the contractor, I don't know what he did, but it's like the money, very good work was done, but as an engineering student, sometimes I can look at things and I quantify them. I can easily tell that some money was eaten. Pieces of corruption has evolved. Thank you.
About 6 years ago, I was driving to Ginger with my girlfriend then. Wow. And I remember, I think I was driving at about 50 kilometers per hour. We were speeding. And then I looked at my girlfriend and I said, am I really over speeding? I feel like we'll be moving at about 50 kilometers per hour, something like that. So he showed me some figures. So you've been driving at this speed. I said, okay. I said, fine, maybe you could give me a ticket and then I moved. But I was going for Puchara, first visitation of my in-laws. And then he said, did you told me about the kind of struggles I was going to go through in order to get my driving permit. And I remember telling him, officer, please stop wasting my time, give me the ticket. I need to drive and go to Ginger. What is my problem? I think it comes down to the individual character. If you are an individual without morals, definitely corruption will be your thing. If you are the kind that does not condone corruption, I don't think you will involve yourself in any corruption-related practices.
So the big fish gets the big money, and the little trickles down. So you're lucky if a little trickles down to you, no? So if you know something, a little will trickle down to you just to cover up. Smart corruption. I think smart corruption is one of the reasons that the president sometimes doesn't overfight corruption, because he says, if the money is being stolen and used within the economy, the money is within the economy. So if I steal 10,000 and go and buy sugar, the money has gone to the person who sold me the sugar, you know. So sometimes it's as if the money is revolving within the country, the money is still within. The problem is some people will amass most of the money and start doing things outside the country. And again, even if they amassed all the money, how about the poor? How about that little child who is supposed to go to school, whose life could be changed by that money sitting in the bank account? So smart corruption could be fine, but again, at the end of the day, it's not smart, it hurts the poor. The person who's stolen may feel smart for making a good investment decision, but who suffers? The little boy and the little girl who can't go to school. So the mother who is giving birth on the hard, cold floor without enough medicine. Character and integrity. I once worked with pastors who are top government officials, who are the main thanksgivers for corruption. Like that money stolen from corruption. Oh, we thank God for this deal. God has blessed us, has answered that prayer. And as a Christian, it breaks my heart and makes me lose confidence in my own government and my own leaders. So, who is holy? Someone said none of us is holy. But I don't think it's a holiness thing here. Because many times, even the Christians do the exact same things that the non-Christians are doing. We should be better, true. But are we when we succumb to the pressure? That's the question. And it's easier to say when you're not in the government office with needs. When you're in the government office with the access and with the needs and the pressure, it may be another thing altogether when someone is giving you a thank you for a deal they would like you to pull off. So corruption, according to Transparency International, is the abuse of entrusted power or resources for private gain. Entrusted power means you've been voted in. That's all. So you have an office that probably you go because you passed the interviews, or you've been voted in as a leader, or whichever way it is that you have the power, that you've been entrusted to that power nonetheless. So you abuse that position, or you use that position. I feel helpless every time I think about corruption. That's my personal feeling. Because I think I've either seen too much, or suffered too much from it, or felt helpless about the ways in which it can be controlled. And I'd like to ask Claire to say something about corruption before we continue.
When we say corruption is abuse of power, entrusted power for private gain, corruption is so wide. There's silent corruption, someone talked about smart corruption. There's even silent corruption. When I don't come to class to teach, that's one way of corruption. It's silent, absenteeism. So corruption takes different forms, and one thing we need to understand is that corruption has long-term effects. And those long-term effects, whether you're the one who gets corrupted or you're the one who's practicing the corruption, corruption fights back, whether you like it or not. I was just sharing with her a scenario. There was this, there was a time we had a discussion in Botswana, and it was African Union that had organized this conference. But one thing I had to present was there was a gentleman who was a principal of a school, and then there was an administrator, then there was a student. So there are three characters in this. So the student could not attend class, but he was a medical student. But the principal would be compromised. Whenever the student would come, he would bribe the principal and also the administrator. And it went on and on and on. So the final year medical student finished school. Of course, he's meant to go to the field, and that is the hospital where he's meant to work. So what happened is, the principal's wife falls sick. And where is she meant to go? To the hospital. Whom does she find there? The medical student. Former medical student in quotes. And the student is supposed to operate on the wife. Guess what happened? He could not even hold the operative, tools to operate the wife. The end result was death. Now, gentleman comes with a daughter to check on the work, the progress, only to realize whom does he glance on the first? The medical student. What am I trying to say? Corruption fights back. It's a long-term effect, but it fights back. So sometimes it takes a lot of work to be involved in this corruption, fight, but we need to do something about it. It takes different forms, not only need to, and there are different types of corruption. So to just end with, just to let you know, there's corruption of need and corruption of greed, where we have brand corruption and then greed corruption. And this takes different sides where we can somehow address issues of petty corruption, where we are looking at legislation. We can use different methods. But the brand corruption is very difficult. It takes the political will, but for me I add, it takes demonstrated commitment. That's what we need as a country. And no country is immune to corruption. All countries globally are corrupt. But the magnitude is what matters. Japan, it has, if we look at the symptoms of corruption, has its own. For Uganda, it's a different story. So we need to rise up, and this is a very good discussion, because now we are looking at, when you look at the potholes, when you look at the rehabilitative classes or health sector, does that intrigue you to fight and say no, corruption is bad? Or it facilitates you to do more to make the corrupt?
Put in place the Bank to Education Act, which was to give the blacks only poor quality education, while the whites enjoyed world-class education. So they did this, and of course the black people were helpless for many years, but then after more than a decade, like a decade and a half, in 1962 or 3 or 4, now those black children who had been denied the right education came back as very notorious people who gave the government such a hard time. But somehow, again, it's the government which reaps the consequences of this corruption. Again, we've been at this for many decades now. Since we achieved that independence, we've been corrupt, and we still suffer the consequences like Linda has said, but does it motivate us to change? What are your results? Were people motivated by the problems or no?
They were more corrupt.
They became more corrupt.
Yeah. And these were students, managers of the future.
That's true, but painful. Painful. Very painful.
So if man does not go back to the Creator, then the system still remains as it is, destroyed. Because you can't patch up a wound. It will still cash out. So I thank you for everything that you are doing. But God, if we do not put Him in the center, if we continue separating the church from the state, church from family affairs, church from work, then such issues will continue and evil will continue ruling. Thank you.
Corruption will be criticized and people pick a lesson. For example, one pastor, we find a pastor has 3,000 followers, and these followers have children, and children attend nursery school. Now, if you see that big number of people can follow someone, and if that person can criticize corruption, do you think we shall be taking the step in the country? But it's unfortunate that right now what is increasing corruption in Uganda, the distrust people have in the church leaders. Right now, there is a lot of corruption, that there are some things which I don't want to talk about, that if church leaders fight corruption in church, I think the church can be the leading corruption fighter in the coming years. Thank you so much.
And when we go to God, we expect different results because of the newfound integrity and newfound loyalty to God. I wish I could trust that if someone is a Christian, then they will act in the good. But even that is not reliable. When you actually see the leaders, the church leaders themselves, robbing the company. So the person who would be exemplary, the shepherd of the flock is doing the wrong thing, what do the sheep do? They follow the shepherd. That workers earn very low wages, and therefore many accept it as a necessary evil or even answered prayer. You would know if you were working in the government. You would see how common this is. It also reinforces inequality as the rich steal more and lots of money moves around at the top with little trickling down. So corruption reinforces inequality because the rich get richer and the poor get a little rich but remain even much poorer. And worst of all, the poor who would benefit from those resources which are being stolen do not get anything. That's even worse. Or they get much less than they need or deserve. It is something many of us have come to accept and play along with, or else you'll be kicked out of your office if they know that you're the whistleblower. There's a Whistleblowers Act, by the way. But still, so many people suffer when they are faithful. So somehow, when you're working in the government, or when you're working with these people who are corrupt, you find that you, the person of honor, will die in your poverty. You understand what I mean? They'll give you that impression. Oh, you're faithful, it's okay. Remain faithful, nothing will come towards you. But of course, God blesses those who are faithful in the end. But that is how it seems sometimes. You can't beat the system, and if you can't beat them, do what? A corrupt deal. And all of them must benefit from it. If you don't benefit from it, or if you don't agree with whatever is done, doesn't work. In 2013, Uganda was the country most susceptible to corruption in East Africa. That's the East African Bribery Index. According to Transparency International, also, and with the highest number of corrupt instances happening through bribing the police. Actually, most of us, if you're driving and you have a car and then something happens, you'll find that that little bribe of 10,000 that you give the police saves you so much inconvenience when it comes to going to look for your permit from the office 2 weeks or a month later. So you find that it's like, it provides the easy way out, the smooth way out. So we may hate the corruption, but we participate in it out of, like it's the most convenient thing you'll do sometimes. It will give you the most convenient option. By 2017, Uganda's rank had fallen to third after Tanzania's police and Kenya's police. A slight improvement also found that just for 2015 to 2016, that financial year, a total of 3.8 billion shillings was unaccounted for in the local government. This is money that was not used and no one can say, that is not available and no one can say where it went. What also hurts is that there's a lot of impunity that goes along with such things. So there's this missing money that cannot be accounted for, but nothing is done as well. Or little they'll just say, account for those funds, write better reports. Or like they'll just go around, and many times even the auditors are bribed just to let things cool off. The payroll anomalies amounted to 11.3 billion. That is overpayments, paying people more than they deserve, unsupported pension payments, ghost pensioners, and wrongly paid salaries. Paying ghost workers. So ghost workers, ghost pensioners, and that is ghost everything, ghost schools, ghost hospitals, and ghost everything. Everything has a section of ghosts in it. And yet, with all that, we still had unspent balances of over 13 billion shillings. That is money that seated on the account and has not done what it's supposed to do. And the collection of revenue amounted to 17 billion shillings. These are people who probably bribed the tax collectors not to pay. 100 is most clean, and 0 is most corrupt. So things get worse, then get better a bit, then get worse. Because to probably get a little worse, but just a little better. Because the people haven't changed and the systems are not yet better. So the corruption perception score ranges from 0 to most corrupt and 100 to least corrupt. Which was perceived level, perceived, not even actual, because even the actual end is not usually very different from the perceived. The perceived level of corruption in the public sector only. So given, of course, that the Auditor General's office says that it's the Ministry of Local Government and the Ministry of Public Service that are most corrupt, it means that the Ministry of Local Governments has played a huge role in getting that score of the corruption percentage. The reasons for bribing that people say, according to a survey, there's 2014 and 2016 also from East African Bribery Index. It was the only way to access a service. I think sometimes people go to offices and then be like that. Come back later, come back 2 weeks from now, come back 1 month. So people know that if you go with a bribe, you get what you want. Like, yes, you get the service. If you don't go with a bribe, they'll keep bouncing you. So the public officials play on the minds of the people, of the civilians, and give them services only when they have bribed or hastening up the service. You see, accessing the service and hastening up the service are the two main reasons that people are saying they have to be involved in corruption. And then again, when they've done something wrong, avoid problems with the authorities. So one is 2014, another is 2017, but you can see that this only grows. The wanting to access a public service is 54%, and while it was lower in 2014. Followed very closely and almost similarly by the judiciary. Why? According to the World Bank, the corruption affects the poorest in the society. If it wasn't these poorest who are suffering, it would at least be called smart corruption, like someone said. It would at least be smart. But the problem is that the poorest are the ones who suffer. And it erodes people's trust in the government. I can't say I've not succumbed to this. And many of us who actually care for the right thing will at some point succumb to this. Because you trust God and you're hoping things will work out for you, but the system kind of overwhelms you. Because the people who should protect and preserve the nation are not doing so. It impedes investment and thus development. Of course, if you steal the resources, what will you use to invest and what will you use to develop the society? So on the control of corruption, I indicated the percentile scale from the index -2.5 to +2.5. Uganda is still in the negatives. We are not yet even doing half as much as we should do to control. Now, in curbing corruption, one very important thing is technological adoption. Not so. Because if things are transparent, then at least you can track the resources and know where the things are going. But look, that's why Uganda lies in sub-Saharan Africa. Uganda, along with this sub-Saharan Africa, along with these countries in South Asia, are performing the least when it comes to technological adoption. And of course, the best countries like the Tokyo, Japan, South Korea, China, and Europe and America have highly advanced technological adoption that help them make everything transparent and thus make their governments less prone to corruption. Of course, people will always be corrupt because, like, again, we are sinners, like he said, we are sinners and we are prone to do evil. So, okay, we are sinners. At least if the systems are in place to control that corruption, it can reduce. But again, Uganda is doing bad. So if we could at least invest in technological adoption, it would help us. So this is from World Economic Forum. So what has Uganda done about corruption? Uganda is actually very active about stopping corruption. But again, with one little finger it's fighting corruption, and with 9 big fingers, the people are stealing. It has the Anti-Corruption Act, the Penal Code, the IGG, and from the Inspectorate of Government, Public Finance Management, Leadership Code, Public Prosecution and Disposal of Public Assets, Whistleblowers Protection, Commission of Inquiries, blah, 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 blah. Are any of them working? So even these people who are fighting corruption, that very rich corrupt guy, the big fish, will go and bribe them for a favorable and how do I call it? Like a smaller punishment for what they deserve. They'll say, okay, I stole 2 billion shillings, but let me pay a fine of 50 million. I give you 100 million in your private pocket. I pay only 50 million shillings, and then the case is somehow dismissed. here and there. So even the people who are fighting corruption are suffering with corruption because they're also prone to corruption. So as Christians, and there are very many Christians, what can we do? Because already we know what is right. But knowing is one thing, doing is another. When you're in the place with the people and in that environment. So I'm going to compare a few countries and their local governments so to see how Uganda is faring or not faring. I put United Kingdom at the top because all these countries are former British colonies. So it means that that system is kind of similar. But the UK is doing very well. Okay, of course these institutions are not extractive like ours, but at least we could learn a thing or two from them. So we have United Kingdom, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. Meanwhile, Rwanda is doing very well in its government efficiency round. Do you remember the government efficiency round we went through? Rwanda is among the best countries in Africa. Okay, that government is small. So Rwanda is like one big district in Uganda. So you can almost say, oh, it's small, so it's easier to manage. But again, they've put in that effort. So the number of local governments, United Kingdom is very difficult because it has several kingdoms under it. But then Kenya has 47 local governments and it's a big country compared to Uganda, which has 130 what? 4 local governments. So imagine, Uganda is very small with very many local governments. Then Kenya is very big with only 47 local governments. But again, Kenya is inefficient in its local government. But its government efficiency rank is much higher. No, much higher. It was the same as Uganda's for 2019. So we're kind of on the same level. Tanzania is doing worse than Uganda and Kenya. But it's a very big country, almost the same as, I think it's a bit bigger than Kenya. But it has fewer local governments as well. It has these regions, and these local governments are regional governments. I say it has less than 30 because Tanzania is added to Zanzibar. So when you see this class, it's Tanzania plus Zanzibar for regions, urban councils, and rural districts. Rwanda has only 4 local governments. That is one city. Kigali, and then Uganda has 137 districts, meaning 137 local governments. The tiers. UK, which is kind of big, has only 1 to 3 tiers in some places. Some places have 1 tier, some have 3 tiers. Kenya has only 1 tier, so if it's a county, that's the whole local government, and everything will end up at 2. So it has 47 tiers in total because it has only 1 tier per local government. Tanzania has 3, the district, divisions, and then the ward, which would be like the village. Then Rwanda has 4 tiers, districts, sectors, cells, and villages. Though of course its local governments are few. Then Uganda, with its very many districts and very many local governments, has again the biggest number of tiers. Do you think that's efficiency or inefficiency? What do you think? Inefficiency? It's debatable. District, county, sub-county, parish, and village. And the services are quite the same. So all of them provide education, health, road services, sanitation, and everything. And support economic development. The financing is also quite similar for all of them, apart from Rwanda, because it's simple, only tax and national government grants. But then the corruption perception index. See, United Kingdom has 77. Remember, 100 is the best, cleanest. So it's even above average. It's doing well. It's the 12th out of 180 countries. Kenya. Remember, Kenya and Uganda are the same. 28 out of 100 and 28 out of 100. We are both the 137 out of 180 districts. Tanzania is doing worse, like I had said earlier. 37 out of 100. Sorry, it's doing better. Oh, sorry, it's doing better. It's government that was more inefficient, but for corruption perception, it's doing better than Uganda and Kenya. So it's 96 out of 180. And then Rwanda is doing much better. It's above average. The average of 50. And even its position is quite good. It's 51 out of 180. So Rwanda is doing well. Because its system is a bit better. But of course, like someone said, there are so many forms of corruption. So some people will say, oh, their leader is a dictator and stuff like that. Maybe that's another form of corruption. But at least when it comes to accountability of resources, there are corruption perception. So we're going to come to policy reform.
I'm going to begin with two things that I think can change or can improve our country so that we can reduce corruption. First, in order to have corruption, we have to begin with the young, the children. For example, we have to begin grooming our children from given the families that we come from. For example, we have to tell them, offertory, they give you this offertory, this is what you're supposed to take. If you're going to go for a post of class interest, don't give people sweets. Don't take the extra pencils. Start small things, and then instead of all the behaviors. Another thing, it's the improvement of technology. Let me give an example. I'm a law student. While I was interning at a magistrate court, there's this electric thing where you have to press your thumb to show that you have attended. You cannot forge that, meaning normally every magistrate had to come at an exact time and leave at a certain time. And then the other thing is in high court, the speaker, meaning when you're talking, you're not going to talk about a bribe. You have to talk through and it's going to be recorded. So I pray that this is improved, not only in the law sector, the police, the what, so there is something that can prove, even though the money comes in, that it is so digital that you cannot steal this money.
Now we are divided by new technologies, religion, everything is popping up. We cannot define lines on which we can set ourselves. I don't think we need not Uganda or regions or Eastern, but we need Uganda as Ugandans. My recommendation, but Mr. Moises, I think you can explain yourself. If I didn't get it right.
No, it will be okay. I will respond.
Okay. So, in regards to my recommendations, civic studies. Civic studies, I studied civic studies until P3, and I think it was only my first term. What I understood in my civic studies, I understood the flag, I understood what the different emblems meant, I understood the anthem, I understood different things we were taught until it was kind of sparked off. We do not, and everyone by the time they reach the age of 12, by the time they reach a minimum understanding, they should know their rights in the Constitution. They should love their nation. They should know that I want to pay taxes because I know where my money is going. You cannot love something you don't understand. And the best place to understand this is school, because we spend a lot of time in school. Your parents may not even know these things, so they cannot teach you. I think the government, one of the best ways the government can play a big part is to instill knowledge and instill love of our own nation, of who we are. We should see that when I'm doing something, I think, that's a very common saying, in the long run, why do people fear these penalties? I do not know why. I do not have an answer. Why would there be a death penalty and someone still goes ahead to do something that brings them to the death penalty? It's a funny thing. Penalties are supposed to be deterrent, But again, penalty should be appropriate.
I should assuage your fears about federalism. One of the scapegoats that is being used by the central government is to draw it again along ethnic lines, which ideally shouldn't be a problem, but after all, we all have a right to know where we come from.
I don't think the problem is having as many districts as possible. I think these districts are to bring the services closer to the local community. The problem we have is the funds are actually being misused, Jonathan.
A more likely unpopular opinion to some people. I think we need a change of leadership of this country. And I'm taking this view from the fact or the perspective that it is very hard to kill the dog that gets you home just because it stole meat.
Yes.
Okay? Most especially when there are a lot of threats of people trying to invade your home. We have been talking about the big fish and the fact that the laws and the actors are concentrating more on the small fishes, right? But I think that is because the big fish, if you send your hand uncalculated, they might bite you. And once they bite you, there's a bigger force that's going to protect them even after they've bitten you. So I think we need a government, or a president, or a government that's willing, who has the political will to fight this corruption, that has no pressure of people that is trying to satisfy.
I think all of you, in one way or another, if the circumstances agree. So I have several angles of seeing this. The first would be to make local governments more self-reliant by encouraging them to have their own investments. So every local government can make money in its own right, no? Imagine if the children in the family, remember I gave us an analogy of a parent and children. If all the children are looking to the parents for everything, it's quite a burden and they won't be satisfied. But if they're equipped and independent enough to actually operate in their own capacities, if they have a level of independence, it would be very helpful. It would go a long way to make an improvement if the leaders are good. Not so. That will increase their competitiveness and provide them with more resources to do efficient work. In some countries, local governments even compete with each other. This city will say, we are the best, we are better than the rest of you because we are rich, we are making more money, and we have invested in this and that and the other. So imagine if our local governments were competitive enough to also have their own, like that autonomy in which they can develop in their individual rights. Do you understand? So that one district is doing very well, if another district is weak, it feels ashamed and is forced to emulate the well-functioning district. So increasing competitiveness and increasing the autonomy of each local government so that they're not crying for funds in developing their communities. So that would go two ways. Removing that whole impunitive thing. If a local government does badly, put measures to punish rightly. Like some countries will say, okay, you local government, you didn't do well, we are cutting your resources for the next financial year. That's their punishment. Whereas the local government which did well, they even add them incentives and they reward them. So that way, each local government feels accountable to the head government to know that they must do well, otherwise their actions have repercussions. You understand? So incentivize good performance. Use systems that make all financial transactions transparent and traceable. For example, the blockchain technologies. This was supposed to be introduced using by the central bank a few years ago. If the leaders know that something is going to work and will take the money out of their reach, they will sabotage it because of the corrupt tendencies, which we must address. But imagine if you had blockchain technologies or some other system that would make every single coin of the government traceable to the whole public, so that they know which money went into which account. That would make some people scared. You would not steal money anyhow. Actually, we didn't steal the money because the whole country would know it went into my account. I would not steal the money. You understand? And some countries actually put very serious punitive measures. China goes as far as the death row for corrupt people. So once they charge you and they find evidence that you stole the money, you go to the gallows. Imagine that. So imagine if you knew the risk, knowing that you stealing $500,000 or even if it's $10,000 and know you will lose your life for it, you would not, you think really hard before you stole that money. So increasing the punitive measures is work very well. Paying public work as well. I advocate for this because of labor economics. A man has to take care of his family. You understand? So if people are starving, they won't even be incentivized to work hard. Then you shall have the silent corruption of people who are never in office because they are busy trying to make money in other ways or trying to make ends meet in other ways to make up for the money they do not have. So paying public work as well gives people a sense of dignity. You know, when you have a job and you're earning well, you have some dignity because you feel like the people who are paying you, the people you're working for actually respect the input that you're giving them. But of course, worldwide, governments always pay less than the private sector. So again, we work for our government out of pride. That's if we love our country enough. So introducing the digital government. This would be a little broader than the traceable financial transactions. Because this would be both at the central government level and at the local governments. It would put in place systems for checks and balances and clear accountabilities. We need to know which raw materials did you use to build that road. Did you use less than was required? You know, there should be checks and balances for everything. That way people will not do shoddy work. They only get away with shoddy work because no one checks the process. You understand? And the only people check the process, they are bribed. So anyway, imagine if there was checks and balances for even the processes. People would think twice before doing shoddy work. Combating systemic corruption. This corruption we are talking about is a culture. It's systemic, it's within us. Because like some parents have said, Claire was saying, like your children, and you have to raise your children in such a way that they are honorable, they have integrity, and they find it abhorrent to start stealing the government's money. And then on top of that, I think we do not love our country. Many countries, people are so proud of their country, they are proud of their country and they give their countries. How many of us would give our countries? If they say that Uganda had a crisis, get money out of your pocket too. How many are we? 44 out of 50. So the rest of us don't. You see that we don't care enough about our country.
No, the money.
Oh, we don't. Actually, like, let the country pay there. We are here. As long as we are fine.
Yes.
You can't give what you don't have. Imagine you had the money and the country needed the money. How many of us have that culture and that heart to give the country instead of taking away from the country? There's a few of us. So we don't have that nationalistic pride of this is my country, I belong to it. Most of us will be fleeing the country to look for better opportunities because we despise what has been created in our country because of the corruption. See how corruption is a vicious cycle. So people are corrupt and we all suffer the repercussions because we all go through bad roads and this bad, poor infrastructure, and because of that we despise our own country. Do you see how it's a cycle? And because of that, we neglect and abandon our own country. I was telling my sister today that you love who you give. That's something I learned today. So if you're not giving someone and you neglect them, you won't love them. And I think that's true for all of us. If you do not invest any of yourself into someone, there's no way in which you're going to love them. You just love them as a brother from a distance or a sister from a distance, but there will be no attachment. But imagine if we had that culture of giving to our nation, we would love our nation and would feel bad to take from it. You understand? Imagine all Ugandans had that in them. A shift in the culture that we give our country instead of taking from it. It would help to have that systemic corruption. Shaming the corrupt. Our corrupt people are the proudest and the most confident among them all. Because they have the money, so they think they have the power and they'll get away with anything. But imagine if our culture would bring shame on them. Imagine if going through a corrupt transaction would bring you so much personal shame that you wouldn't even tolerate the shame in yourself. That would take a whole shift in our psyche. That's what it would require. Some of us may not even understand how we come to that. But if we individually found corruption truly shameful, not like how we support thieves in movies, you know? If we actually found corruption deeply shameful on an individual basis, then we would not be encouraged to be corrupt. Because if you feel ashamed on an individual basis, you don't need anyone to say shame on you. But getting to that, we need a lot of psychological work. Strengthen government institutions as well, because the institution is like a skeleton, it's a system. If our institutions are strong, if our institutions give the country and protect the country, if our institutions take, instead of like being, how do I call it, instead of being robbed, because we rob our institution. So if our institutions were very protective in that they retain their resources, it would also make it hard for us to steal. Meanwhile, in every country there will always be people who are just naturally trended towards doing the wrong thing. So there's always corrupt people. But at least if the gate is strong, it will be hard for the thief to enter. So even that gate must be strengthened. A paradigm shift, a real paradigm shift is needed on an individual level, within our psyche. If you find corruption shameful and you do not take pride in it, and you cannot even let anyone bear, you cannot bear the thought of anyone knowing what you did, then you wouldn't really be corrupt. And that system too. All our leaders, most of them, actually it's very hard to find a faithful leader. If our leaders were exemplary, we would be somewhere. But maybe it could start with us. We are very few. But it could start with us. If we said on an individual basis, I will not rob my country, instead I will give to my country. And we try to live that and uphold it and spread that value. If we loved our country enough to build it and give it for free without having to take from it, it would make a difference. The helplessness we feel is because we are drowned in the corruption. So we feel like, hey, everyone is corrupt, I'm going to die in this. Because they get the money every year, and they have the people to do it, and they can do it. And they can increase the standard of living in this society. However, corruption and other vices must be curbed, or else things will continue the way they are. Especially the establishment of strong institutions, which would need it so that in order for the local government financing to yield actual development. These are my references. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for organizing this and making it possible that we can come and reason together what we can do with our nation. Thank you once again. God bless you.